The distant stars twinkled in the black void of space, a sea of possibilities. On Earth, the skies were not as they once were. Years of conflict had shaped the landscape, and human civilization had spread to the stars. But while humanity had taken its place among the galaxy's many species, it was still seen by many as insignificant. The Zorathians, a powerful and ancient race, were among those who viewed Earth and its people as a mere curiosity. But this time was different. The arrival of Princess Eulora, heir to the Zorathian throne, was a momentous occasion. She had come to Earth, a gesture of goodwill from her people. The Zorathians were known for their technology and their leadership, and the princess was considered one of the brightest among them. Her arrival was meant to strengthen alliances and ensure peace across the galaxy. The royal palace in the heart of the capital city stood tall, shining with lights from every corner. Its towering spires stretched towards the heavens as if trying to touch the stars. The city below, filled with excited citizens, looked on in awe. It was a celebration like no other. Representatives from various alien species, dignitaries, and ambassadors had gathered to witness this historic moment. It was a time of peace and promise, the beginning of a new chapter. Among the crowd was Jack Taylor, a former soldier who had turned into a mercenary after the scars of war became too much to bear. He stood in the shadows, his eyes scanning the crowd. His tall frame and sharp features made him stand out, but he preferred it that way. He was no longer part of the military, no longer a man bound by orders or allegiance. He had chosen this life for freedom, though sometimes he felt it weighed heavier than the armor he used to wear. He wasn't here to celebrate. In fact, he didn't care much for the princess or the spectacle surrounding her arrival. But he had been hired for a job, a simple security detail for a visiting dignitary. Jack had seen too many grand events like this turn into disasters, so he kept his eyes peeled, always alert. This wasn't just about protecting one person. It was about ensuring that everything went smoothly. Too much was at stake for anyone to slip up. Princess Eora, standing on the grand stage with her father, the Zorathian king, radiated confidence. She was unlike any ruler Jack had seen before. Her flowing silver hair caught the light, and her violet eyes sparkled with intelligence. She had the beauty of royalty, but there was something more to her, a strength that came from within. Jack could see it, even from a distance. She wasn't just some princess, she was a leader, born to take command. The crowd cheered, their voices rising in unison. The air was thick with excitement, but in the middle of it, Jack's attention snapped to something else. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A sense of danger, a feeling he had learned to trust in the heat of battle, washed over him. It was faint at first, like a whisper on the wind, but then it became impossible to ignore. Out of the corner of his eye, Jack saw a movement, a figure in the shadows, slipping through the crowd with the precision of a predator. The person's posture was stiff, unnatural, their face hidden beneath a cloak. Jack's instincts kicked in, but before he could act, he saw the figure make its way towards the stage. In the next moment, the world seemed to slow down. He saw the glint of metal, a blade, sharp and deadly, in the hand of the figure. The assassin was fast, and their target was clear: Princess Eulora. The crowd around the stage was oblivious too, caught up in the celebration to notice the danger lurking in their midst. Jack didn't think. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He sprang into action, cutting through the crowd with the grace of a seasoned fighter. He pushed people aside, feeling the rush of adrenaline course through him. His heart pounded in his chest as he closed the distance between himself and the assassin. He reached the stage just as the assassin lunged forward, aiming for the princess. It all happened in a heartbeat. Jack leapt into the air, pushing the assassin away from the princess. But it was too late. The blade, intended for her, found its mark. Not in Eulora's chest, but in Jack's side. The pain was immediate, searing through his body like fire. He could feel the blood rushing from the wound, soaking his shirt. The crowd gasped in shock as Jack crumpled to the floor, the assassin's weapon still lodged deep in his flesh. But Even as his vision blurred, Jack knew he had done his job. He had saved the princess. Princess Eulora, her expression a mix of shock and confusion, stood frozen for a moment. Her eyes met Jack's as he fell to the ground. The crowd had erupted into chaos, with guards rushing to secure the area, but the princess's gaze never left Jack. He had done something unimaginable. He had risked his life, a complete stranger, for someone he had never met. Blood pooled around Jack's body as he tried to stay conscious. His breath was shallow, each inhale sharp with pain. He could hear Eulora's voice now, distant and soft, calling out to him. But it felt like it was coming from a different world. The edges of his vision began to darken as the world around him seemed to fade away. He could feel the weight of the princess's gaze on him, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt something he had buried deep inside, a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about making it through another battle. There was something greater at play now. He had saved her, and in that moment, everything had changed. The world around Jack was a blur of faces, voices, and distant sounds. He could hear footsteps, the frantic shouts of the guards, and the soft murmur of worried conversations. His body was heavy, and every movement seemed like a battle. His chest heaved with effort, and the pain in his side felt like it was consuming him. But through the haze, one thing remained clear. Princess Eulora's face, her gaze locked onto him as if searching for some answer that he couldn't give. He had done it. He had saved her. But now, the cost of that choice was settling in. The pain, the blood, and the uncertainty of whether he would survive the wound. As the world around him began to stabilize, Jack's eyes fluttered open. He was no longer lying in the chaos of the celebration hall, but in a small, quiet room. The soft hum of machinery filled the space, and the cool air of the room cut through the sweat on his skin. He could smell something unfamiliar, medicine, sterile and strange. His mind struggled to focus, to process what had happened. But the moment he saw Princess Eulora standing beside his bed, looking down at him, everything snapped into place. "Are you awake?" Yore's voice was soft, almost hesitant, like she wasn't sure how to speak to him. Jack tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice hoarse. "I'm fine," he managed to croak, though he knew it wasn't true. The pain was a constant reminder that he wasn't fine. "I've taken worse." Eulora didn't smile at his words. Instead, her eyes were filled with a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. She had seen him throw himself in harm's way to protect her, and yet she didn't understand why. She had never been a stranger to sacrifice. Her people, her family, had known the price of leadership. But this was different. This was a human. A man who had no reason to save her. Her violet eye searched his face for any sign of explanation. "Why did you do it?" "You didn't know me?" "You could have died for someone who meant nothing to you." Jack's lips twitched in a faint, painful smile. "You're the princess. You deserve to be protected." Eulora frowned, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "But that doesn't explain why. Why would you risk everything for someone like me?" Jack turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. He had seen her before, in the moments before everything had gone wrong. There was something about her, a quiet strength beneath the surface, an inner fire that matched the fire in his own soul. He had seen the leader in her even when she was standing among the crowd, the weight of her people's expectations on her shoulders. He knew, deep down, that she was more than just royalty. She was someone who would change the galaxy. But Jack didn't say all of that. He only shrugged, wincing at the movement.
Sometimes we do things because they feel right, not because we expect something in return. I did it because I couldn't stand by and watch someone die when I had the chance to do something about it.
Yore looked at him for a long moment, her gaze never wavering. There was no pity in her eyes, no sense of superiority, just understanding. But then, something shifted, and her expression softened. "Thank you," she whispered, almost too quietly for him to hear. Jack nodded, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? The truth was, he hadn't expected any of this. He hadn't expected to survive the attack. He hadn't expected to wake up in a room like this, surrounded by advanced alien technology, with the princess herself watching over him. He certainly hadn't expected to feel something stir within him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Days passed as Jack lay in that room, recovering from the wound. Yora visited him regularly, bringing him food and talking with him. At first, their conversations were simple. Small talk about the planet, the mission, the celebration. But as the days went by, something began to grow between them. Their conversations shifted to deeper topics. Yola spoke of her people's history, their struggles, their triumphs. She spoke of her father, the Zorathian king, and the immense pressure of being his heir. Jack listened carefully, offering little more than the occasional word of encouragement or a question of his own. He wasn't used to being this vulnerable, to opening up to someone like this, but something in Yulore made it easy. There was a calmness about her, a quiet strength that he admired. As the days turned into a week, Jack began to regain his strength. The wound, though still painful, was healing at an astonishing rate, thanks to the advanced medical technology that Yulora had provided. It was a strange feeling, knowing that something outside of his own body was responsible for his recovery. He had always relied on his own strength, his own skills to get by. But this was different. One evening, as Yola sat by his bed, the conversation took a more personal turn. She was speaking of her future, a future she had never chosen, but one that had been set for her from birth. The weight of her title, the responsibilities she carried, seemed to be too much for her at times. "I never wanted to be a ruler," Yolora admitted quietly. "I wanted to explore the galaxy, see new worlds, meet new species, but the moment I was born, my destiny was already written." Jack watched her carefully. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the burden that she carried. He understood it more than she knew. He too had once been bound by duty, by the need to follow orders, to obey commands. But he had walked away from it all. He had chosen a different path, one that didn't involve servitude. But now, he wasn't so sure anymore. "You don't have to carry that burden alone," Jack said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "You may be the princess, but that doesn't mean you have to face everything by yourself. You have people who care about you, who want to help. You just have to let them." Yara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at him, her gaze steady, as though weighing his words. Then, with a slight smile, she nodded. "Perhaps you're right. I've always had to carry the weight of my people's expectations. But maybe it's time I learned to lean on others, to trust them." Jack didn't say anything more, but the quiet understanding between them was enough. In that moment, he knew that he hadn't just saved her life. He had given her something more, a chance at a different kind of life, a life where she didn't have to carry the world on her shoulders alone. The days continued to pass, and the bond between them deepened. Jack found himself slowly growing more attached to Eulora, more than he had ever intended. Her strength, her intelligence, her vulnerability, all of it drew him in. But he knew that it was dangerous to feel this way. He was a human, a former soldier, nothing more than a mercenary. And she was royalty, an alien princess with responsibilities that spanned galaxies. There could never be anything between them. But still, he couldn't deny the connection that had begun to form. And as he looked at her, he knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges lay ahead, he would be by her side, ready to protect her, just as he had done before. The days on the Zorathian capital planet passed by in a blur for Jack. He had grown accustomed to the quiet hum of the medical rooms, where he spent his time recovering, and the steady, rhythmic steps of Princess Eulora's visits. What had begun as simple daily check-ins soon turned into long conversations about things far beyond politics or duty. Yolora spoke of her home, the beauty of the forests and mountains on her home world, the culture of the Zorathians, and even her dreams of a different future. Jack listened quietly, the bond between them growing stronger with each word. He felt a strange peace in her presence, something he had never felt before. But peace was fleeting. Outside the quiet of the palace and its healing chambers, something darker was taking shape. The galaxy was not at rest. The rebel forces of the Vark, a vicious alien faction, had not given up their mission to destroy Princess Iora. They saw her as a symbol of everything they hated. The power of the Zorthian Empire, the unity that threatened their ambitions, and they would stop at nothing to see her fall. It was late one evening when Jack first heard the rumors. The Zorathian guards who had been stationed outside his quarters to ensure his safety during his recovery began to move with a sense of urgency. The noise from the hallways echoed through the corridors, and Jack could hear the voices of the palace staff talking in hushed tones. Something was happening. Something that didn't feel right. His instincts kicked in, and he knew that danger was approaching. He sat up in his bed, wincing as the old wound in his side protested against the sudden movement. He had been getting stronger, but it still wasn't fully healed. His body had been through much worse, but this time, the stakes were different. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something greater, something he couldn't fully understand yet. His connection to Yolora. Before he could even make sense of the situation, the door to his room slid open. Standing there was General Arathis, a trusted military leader in Yora's army. His tall, imposing figure filled the doorway. His face was hard, his eyes serious. Arathis was the kind of man who exuded authority, and yet there was something about him that didn't sit right with Jack.
Captain Taylor!
Arathis greeted him curtly, stepping into the room.
There's trouble! The Vark are making their move! The princess is in danger. Jack didn't hesitate.
His hand went straight for his boots, pulling them on as quickly as his injured body would allow.
Where is she?
He asked, his voice rough with urgency. Arathis didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched Jack for a moment, his eyes calculating.
She's with her father, in the royal chambers. But that's not where the danger is.
The Vark have infiltrated the palace. We've lost contact with several of our patrols.
There's a traitor within the Zorathian ranks!
Jack's heart sank. He had suspected something wasn't right. He had seen the way some of the higher-ranking officers had looked at Yola, the way some had treated her as if she was just a symbol to be used. He didn't trust everyone in the palace, but a traitor within the ranks? That was worse than he had imagined.
Tell me where to go,
Jack said, standing up and wincing from the pain in his side.
I'll protect her.
General Arathis nodded, a grim expression on his face. Follow me. We'll get you to her. As they moved through the corridors, the palace was in full chaos. The once peaceful halls were now filled with tension and urgency. Guards rushed past them, their faces hard with determination. The sound of blaster fire echoed from somewhere down the hall, followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of combat. The air was thick with fear and uncertainty. When they reached the royal chambers, the door was already sealed. Arathis gave a sharp command, and a few of his soldiers quickly began to work on breaking the lock. Jack stood at the ready, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. The tension in the air was palpable. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the door slid open. Inside, Princess Yora was standing by a window, her eyes staring out at the chaos outside. Her back was to the door, but she turned as soon as she heard the sounds of the guards entering. "Jack," she said softly, her voice filled with a strange calm. "You shouldn't be here." Jack ignored her words. He could see the worry in her eyes, the weight of the situation pressing down on her.
"I'm not leaving your side," he said firmly. "We need to move."
The Vark are here,
Yolora nodded. stepping away from the window. She was calm, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. She was not used to this kind of vulnerability, and it made her even more dangerous. She had been trained to lead, to rule, and yet she was still just a person facing an unimaginable threat. The next few hours were a blur of action. The palace was under attack, and the fight was fierce. Jack fought alongside the Zorathian guards, his gun blazing as they pushed back the Vark forces that had breached the palace. Yora, despite her royal status, was not just a bystander. She fought with them, her hands steady as she aimed a blaster at the invading forces. She was a warrior in her own right, a leader who knew what it meant to protect her people. As the battle raged on, Jack found himself facing one of the Vark commanders, a towering figure whose red armor gleamed in the chaos. The two locked eyes, and without a word, they charged at each other, weapons drawn. The fight was brutal, fast, and violent. Jack's body, still healing from the earlier injury, screamed in protest as he swung his weapon. But there was no stopping now. The fate of the princess and the galaxy itself hung in the balance. With a final forceful strike, Jack disarmed the Vark commander. He pressed the blade to the alien's throat, his breath coming in quick, sharp gasps. The fight was over, but the war was far from it. He turned back toward Yolora, his eyes locking onto hers. She was standing with one of the guards, her face set in determination. She had fought, and she had survived. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. There was a traitor among them, and the Vark were only one part of the larger danger that threatened the galaxy. Yolora stepped toward him, her expression hardening. "We need to find the traitor," she said, her voice resolute. "The Zorathian Empire can't survive if we don't root them out." Jack nodded. "I'm with you," he said. "Let's finish this." But as the battle outside continued, neither of them could know just how deep the conspiracy ran, or the true price of the heroism that had started all of this. The road ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear. They were no longer just a princess and a mercenary. They were allies in a war that would decide the future of their worlds. The battle had raged for hours, and yet the sounds of explosions and blaster fire still echoed through the grand halls of the palace. Outside, the sky was streaked with the smoke of war, a dark veil that covered the once peaceful city. Jack's body was covered in dirt, blood, and sweat, but his focus never wavered. He had fought many battles in his life, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher. The enemy was not just an invading force. It was everything that Yolora stood for, everything she had worked for, and everything he had risked his life to protect. He stood in the hallway, his back pressed against the cold stone wall, his breath coming in heavy gasps. He was tired, more tired than he had ever been before. But there was no time to rest. The Vark had launched a full-scale assault on the palace, and despite their best efforts, the Zorathians were losing ground. He could hear the sounds of distant gunfire, the shouts of the guards, and the occasional rumble of the palace's foundation shaking beneath their feet. But amidst the chaos, there was one thing Jack couldn't ignore. Princess Elora. She was fighting beside him, as she had been throughout the battle. She was no longer just a princess. She was a warrior, standing tall and proud, her eyes burning with determination. But Jack could see the toll it was taking on her. Her movements were slower now, her breath more labored, and the weariness in her eyes was evident. She had already sacrificed so much for her people, and now she was fighting not just for them, but for her very survival. He turned to look at her, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the battle was far from over. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The traitor is still out there. We can't afford to waste any more time." Elora nodded, her gaze never leaving the door at the end of the hallway. She had known this moment was coming, had known that the battle would eventually lead them to the heart of the conspiracy. But even as she steeled herself for what lay ahead, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something bigger than the traitor. Something that could shatter everything they had fought for. As they moved down the hallway, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Jack's instincts kicked in, and he turned just in time to see a group of armed Vark soldiers emerging from the shadows. They were fast, too fast, and before Jack could react, they were upon him. He fired his weapon, taking down the first soldier, but the second was quicker, dodging his shot and landing a blow to his side. Jack gritted his teeth, the pain almost overwhelming, but he fought through it, using the wall for support as he fired again. The shot hit its mark, but there were still more. The Vark kept coming. Yore stepped forward, her weapon raised, and fired with deadly accuracy. Her shots were precise, and the soldiers fell one by one. But even as she fought, she could see the toll the battle was taking on Jack. His movements were slowing, his energy draining. She could see the strain in his face, the way his body sagged under the weight of his injuries. "Jack," she said, her voice tinged with worry. "You're hurt. You need to rest." Jack shook his head, gritting his teeth.
We don't have time for that. We need to get to the control room.
"We need to find the traitor before it's too late." Laura hesitated, her eyes searching his face. She knew he was right, but she also knew that the longer they fought, the more dangerous it became for both of them. The palace was falling apart around them, and the traitor was still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice firm. "Let's finish this." Together they made their way to the control room, a large chamber filled with advanced Sorathian technology. The walls were lined with screens, blinking lights, and consoles that controlled everything from the palace's security to its communication systems. But as they entered the room, they realized that the traitor had already beaten them there. A figure stood in the center of the room, a hooded cloak obscuring their face. But the moment they turned to face Yolora and Jack, there was no mistaking who it was. Yolora's heart sank as she took a step forward. The general's lips curled into a cruel smile. The general's lips curled into a cruel smile.
You've been too trusting, Princess. Your faith in your people has blinded you. The galaxy is not as peaceful as you think. The Vark were only a tool.
The real enemy was always right here. Jack's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around the grip of his weapon.
You betrayed us.
Arathis laughed, a cold, hollow sound.
Betrayed?
I did what needed to be done. The Zorathian Empire has become weak.
It needs to be torn down and rebuilt. And you, Princess, are nothing but a pawn in the game.
You'll never get away with this. You'll never get away with this. I will stop you. Arathi stepped back, reaching for the control panel behind him. You're already too late. The palace is compromised. The Vark have already begun their invasion. The Zorathian Empire will fall, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Jack's pulse quickened. The traitor had set everything in motion. This was the final move in a game that had been played long before they even knew it. Arethes had planned for this moment. He had orchestrated the entire attack, using the Vark as a diversion while he seized control from within. But Jack wasn't done yet. He wasn't going to let Arathis win. Not after everything they had been through. Without thinking, Jack lunged at the general, his body moving with a speed and desperation born of pure instinct. Arathis barely had time to react as Jack slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. The two struggled, their hands locked around each other's throats, each one trying to gain the upper hand. Yora fired her weapon, hitting one of Arathis' guards who had rushed into the room. The battle was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. As Jack fought with Arathis, he could feel his strength draining. The wound in his side, the injuries from the earlier battles. They were all catching up to him, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. With one final effort, Jack managed to overpower Arathis, knocking him unconscious. But the damage had already been done. The palace was in chaos, the Vark were closing in, and the control room was now under the enemy's control. Jack stood up, his body shaking with exhaustion. He turned to Yora, his eyes meeting hers. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared moment of realization. The battle was far from over, but they had made it this far together. Eulora's voice broke through the silence.
Jack, we have to go. It's not safe here anymore.
Jack nodded, but as he moved toward the door, a sharp pain shot through his side. He staggered, feeling his strength leave him. He had taken the blow for Eulora once, but now, it seemed, he was paying the price. Eulora rushed to his side, her hands on his shoulders. Jack, no. He looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. It's all worth it, he whispered. And then, with a final breath, Jack collapsed into her arms. The fight had taken everything from him, but he had done what he set out to do. He had protected the princess, and he had made sure she had the chance to survive. As Eulora cradled him in her arms, tears filled her eyes. The weight of the galaxy seemed to fall on her shoulders in that moment, but she knew one thing for certain. Jack had given his life for her people, and for the future of the galaxy, and she would make sure that his sacrifice was never forgotten.